blue eye perceives all things conjoined, the past, the future, and the present. Everything flows, and all is connected. This eye is not merely seeing reality, it is touching the truth. This blue eye perceives all things conjoined, the past, the future, and the present. Everything flows, and all is connected. This eye is not merely seeing reality, it is touching the truth.
Alright folks, we're about to get this started today. Got a little late start today. course, I am trying to figure out, and you guys can help me out with this. I am trying to figure out like what would be the best time for you guys for me to do this. I mean, I'd rather get more live, viewers versus. I mean, I'm up to like 150 views for the videos, but that's after the fact, which is fine. I'm cool with that. And if that's the route I got to go, then I'll probably just switch to YouTube, maybe, and then maybe that'll get tracked a little better that way. But so today's topics: minimum wage and their effects on minorities. But first of all, how are you guys doing? I got a little something to show you. So my path into economics and my study of economics and my path into libertarianism and where I am today on my political philosophy, which is more in line with libertarianism than it is with conservatism these days, started with the discovery of a YouTube channel called Learn Liberty. Great YouTube channel, very educational, very thought-provoking for me at the time, and kind of opened my eyes to the science, if you will, of economics. And it was kind of the catalyst that got me to study economics more in depth. And then I got exposed to people like Dr. Stephen Horwitz. He's a doctor of professor of economics. And then Dr. Thomas Sowell. He's also a professor of economics. And also Dr. Walter E. Williams, which leads me to what I'm going to show you today. So a dear friend of mine a few weeks ago emailed, apparently. Now, this is all a surprise to me. Like, I was totally surprised by all this. I've talked to this dear friend of mine on plenty of times, and if he watches and if he doesn't mind me giving his name and let me know in the comments, then I'll do it. I just, whatever. You know what I'm saying. Anonymity. Some words are just hard for me to pronounce. So anyways, he apparently emailed Dr. Walter E. Williams, who is the head of the economics department at George Mason University in over there near D.C. So, and he only works a few minutes away, apparently, from the university campus. So he emailed Dr. Walter E. Williams, kind of told him, Dr. Williams, about me, what I'm about, kind of just a rundown, and asked if he could, get a book signed by him. And all he thought, he told me, was that he would show up and, hand the book to his secretary, and the secretary would walk it back to his office, and he'd sign it and, give it back. But turns out Dr. Williams asked my dear friend to actually come into his office, and they talked for a short time, and mostly, I guess, according to my friend, they talked about me and, what my aspirations and goals on. And so that's that. And so, anyways, actually, and here's the kicker. A few days, I guess, before this encounter that my friend had with Dr. Williams, my friend messaged me on Facebook and asked me, what book would I recommend from Dr. Williams the most? And, I said, Freedom to Choose and Suffer No Fools. And I said, but if I really had to pick one that I would suggest for people to read, for my friend to read, because I thought he was asking me what book, he should read. Well, I said, Race and Economics. See, it's backwards. I got to figure out how to flip that. So anyways, I thought my friend was just asking me, about, what book he should read. Well, it turns out he basically just wanted to get the book signed for me. I don't know if you can see that But Dr. Walter E. Williams actually signed this book for me, and it says, "To Ron Pant, Yours in Pursuit of Liberty." Signed, Dr. Walter E. Williams. And so this book, I have this book already. I have actually 2 editions of this book. And this is the latest edition, if I'm correct. This book is not going to get read. This book is just going to go on my shelf, and it's gonna stay there in a little special spot. And not only that, Dr. Williams handed my friend Frederick Bastiat, The Law, the classic blueprint for a free society. It's a great read. Everybody should read this. Frederick Bastiat, The Law. It's a really thin book. It's more of an essay than it is a book. And every American should read that. Every American. And then gave me a DVD of Suffer No Fools. So that's awesome. And I want to thank my friend from the bottom of my heart. I called him the moment I got the pack. Because see, then a day or 2 after that. No, wait. Yeah, a day or 2 after that. What's going on, Samantha? How you doing? But a day or 2 after that, there's some things not working on my broadcast here. I wish I could get it to work. All of a sudden today, one of the reasons why I'm later is because the webcam wasn't working. I mean, the webcam was on, and everything else using the webcam was working, but for some reason my broadcast software wasn't picking it up, even though it was turning it on as I was trying to broadcast. So, where was I? Oh yeah, so this friend of mine, asked me what my address is a couple days later on Facebook, and I sent it to him, and he was like, "Look out for a package tomorrow." And I'm like, oh, okay. I had no clue what was coming. So the book and it being signed was just a complete surprise to me, and I was ecstatic about it. So that brings me into our subject of the day, because Dr. Walter E. Williams has talked and written extensively about our subject today, and that is the minimum wage and its effect on minorities, especially black minorities within our country. Now, many people have what's going on, Rachel? Appreciate you joining in, and it's been a long time. I haven't seen you in a long time. I miss all my folks down in Jacksonville. I miss Jacksonville. I miss Florida, but Delaware's good. Delaware's been good to me. So, yeah, I bought a house here. And my wife has a great job here, so it's good. So, and just to give you a little background on me, okay? I'll try and make this short, because I'm a talker. I like to tell stories, especially of my hometown, Jacksonville, Florida. I love Jacksonville. But I grew up in a not so nice neighborhood. The crime was not as bad as some places in Jacksonville or in the late 80s, early 90s, but it was up there. But grew up around a lot of black folk. A lot of my best friends were black. So on and so. Can't watch because I'm driving, but I turned it on. Hey man, all good, bro. You can just listen. But what's going on, Mr. Jenkins? Well, we could talk about that, Rachel. Rachel says it's way worse now over there where you grew up. It could be where I grew up. Could be. See, part of my education was initially I went into criminology, and then I transitioned to ordination. What's called the the coursework was called organizational dynamics, but it's basically industrial organizational psychology, and it's a study of psychology within the workplace. But I wanted to work still within criminology. I wanted to do something like to work with youth, like maybe be a youth probation officer, which is something I would still kind of want to do. But my interest has been piqued in other fields of career and whatnot. But so criminology was a big thing. And then when I pursued my IO psychology degree, I actually, anything I could take elective wise, I was free to take anything. I was actually picking, something closer to criminology so I could continue that education. But crime is an interesting thing, and in America, it's not what people think it is in most cases. Okay? And we can get into that maybe another time, maybe later in this show. However, let's get back to minimum wage. So I grew up loving the minimum wage. I couldn't wait for the minimum wage to get hiked. Loved it when it got hiked. Was ecstatic. There was a time there, right, that Ronald Pant didn't get a raise unless the minimum wage was raised. And I thought that was due to outside forces. But then I look back and I go, no, Ron, you just sucked as an employee. You just sucked as an employee. And one of our good friends, some of the people that are watching know one of our good friends. He used to manage Taco Bell down there in Jacksonville, Florida. We'll leave him nameless as well, unless he doesn't mind me naming him. But most of us know who I'm talking about. And this particular friend gave me a job at least twice, maybe 3 times. And the first time was, hey, I can hire you, And then I left and went to work elsewhere, and then he'd give me a second chance. But really, the when I left, it was more or less I stopped showing up to work. I'd call in sick, call in sick, and call in late. Just wouldn't show up. And he actually gave me a second chance. So I'm pretty sure he gave me a job there 3 different times. And so he wouldn't give me a raise, even though he's my friend. Because he knew how I was, right? And I remember getting mad because he would give somebody else a raise, and I'd be like, man, that person this and that and whatnot and whatever. And he'd be like, yeah, but he shows up. Our friend in Jacksonville. See, I was going to tell that story, Sonny, at some time. Brother. And I'll tell it because it's a funny story. I got a funny story with Sonny. But I digress. Let's get back to the subject. So anyways, I loved the minimum wage growing up. I loved a lot of things that are considered liberal growing up. I hated guns because I grew up in an area where I went to 13 to 20 funerals, somewhere in that range, before I even graduated high school, all due to gun violence. And so I hated guns growing up. As far as, I wanted one, and there was a time that I wrongfully carried one. But I hated them. I was all for gun control, especially when I became a Christian at the age of 17. And I was all for gun control, so on and so forth. So my point is that I was on a particular side of things when it came to certain subjects: gun control, minimum wage, taxes. I was all for taxing the rich. I was all for me being a person who, when you looked at my tax return, it's like, I only paid $800 in taxes, but I'm getting $3,000. Yay! I was awesome. I was cool with that. But now I look back and I'm like, man, that's kind of wrong because that money belonged to somebody else. And so the government took it from somebody and gave it to me. And I remember there was a time when I had a discussion with another friend, and I was telling him about my tax return and whatnot. And this friend of mine he was well off at the time. He was making some great money, and he was usually writing a check to the IRS versus receiving one every tax season. And so I said I said something about, what my tax return was, and, the amount, I guess, maybe was brought up. And he looks at me and he goes, "You're welcome." And I'm like, "You're welcome? What are you talking about?" And he goes, "Well, I had to write a check to the IRS for that same amount." And I was like, "Oh." And so he was like, "You're welcome." And at that time, it didn't really dawn on me, like, what was going on, and then later on down the road. So anyways, that's a little backstory, a little snippet of who I was. So fast forward to years later, and I start reading Dr. Walter E. Williams. I start reading Dr. Thomas Sowell, Frederick Bastiat, Henry Hazlitt. Henry Hazlitt's another good one. If you ever get a chance to pick up a book called Economics in One Lesson by Henry Hazlitt, it's a great book. Everybody should read that book. Everybody. It's a really thin book. It's not hard to read. It's not full of complicated words and theories and so on and so forth. It's economics in one lesson, just like the book says it is. And so I started reading a lot about economics and how economics works. So anyways, one of the things that really popped out was how economic policies affect black minorities. Because, see, the black community is near and dear to my heart. And I've always been sort of an activist for the black community all my life. Speaking of like the things that I went through back in Jacksonville, one of our dear friends down there, Norman Lewis, was shot and killed when we were in the 9th grade. And so, and I mourned Norman's death emphatically, and it affected my life in a big way. But years later, I look back and I realized that, Jermaine was shot, Antonio was shot. There was like these other friends of mine. Some of them went to school with us. I don't remember now, but they were friends of mine from just in my dealings with people, and they were all black, and none of them got the front page news like Norman did. And I'm glad Norman got the front page news. I was, like, okay. But it's like nobody talked about their deaths. And that really impressed upon me at a young age. And so I was always an advocate. Like, I always believed, the cops are out to get the black folk, right? And I remember, like, me and my friends, me and my boys, as we would say, we'd be sitting around and we'd talk about this stuff. Man, remember we was up at so-and-so and such and such cop, man, it was messing with us and blah, blah, blah. And I'd be like, yeah, man, the cop's messing with us, man. I'm like the only white dude in like a group of 10. And so I'd be like, yeah, man, stupid cops. But then I look back as I got older and I go, what that, but we were up to no good. Like, we were literally just, like, talking about robbing a place or talking about doing this or talking about doing that. Like, we were up to no good. I mean, so I look back and I think, the cops were justified in messing with us because they kind of knew something was up, Why are you guys hanging out at the store? You ain't got no business hanging out in there because you don't buy nothing out of that store, right? we're hanging out at the ladies' boutique, because hey, whatever. That's a joke. We weren't, but you get what I'm saying. So, at a young age, I was all about the black community, the plight, if you will. But then I started reading. I read Karl Marx. I read a lot of the left-leaning Robert Reich. A lot of other left-leaning economists and whatnot. I don't remember a lot of their names because they're just not that impressive. Okay? Even in their own books, you read Robert Reich's book, and he contradicts himself time and time again. It's hilarious, and it's like, wait a minute, but you said this, and now you're saying this. Don't you see how the principles you're applying, they conflict, and they're contradictory to each other? But so I started reading Walter E. Williams and Thomas Sowell, a lot of these other guys, and what I started noticing was that there was a theme here, and that how things like minimum wage adversely affect, or did affect, especially minorities, and especially black minorities, and especially black minorities in the South. And so, to give you a little back history, in 1910, now, I know things are a little grimy right now in our world, but it's really hard to argue that oppression is greater now than it was in 1910 of blacks. So that being said, in 1910, 71% of blacks over 9 years old were employed. 71%. Compared to only 51% of whites over the age of 9. Now, you might ask, why the age of 9? Because that's pretty much the age that you went to work back then. That's pretty much the age you went to work back then. Education stopped pretty much at that point in time, unless you were a really, 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 really wealthy family. So 71% of blacks in 1910 were employed, whereas only 51% of whites. And these rates are even higher. Like, that's the whole country, okay? But if you were to look in just the South or in the North, that imaginary Mason-Dixon line, the rate goes up to 87% of blacks in the South were employed versus 42% of whites in the South were employed. Now, how is that? And it goes down in the North. Only about, 62% of blacks in the North compared to 78% of whites in the North. How is that? How is that the racist South employed more blacks in 1910 than the enlightened Northerners? You like my air finger quotes? I'll stop it if you don't. How is that? Well, it's simple. No matter how bigoted a person may be, they prefer their pocketbook over their bigotry. No matter how racist a person is, and this is not me, this is the sentiment, and I'm kind of quoting like Dr. Walter E. Williams, Dr. Thomas Sowell, but a person prefers their pocketbook over their bigotry. And how does that lead to higher employment for blacks and lower employment for whites? Well, simple. A lot of these people were probably bigoted. Okay? Well, let's assume that. And let's say you're making an endeavor into building a house. And you have two choices. You got construction company A, or let's say contractor A and contractor B. Contractor A is mostly blacks. And it could be a black-owned contractor. Okay? Contractor B is white. Okay? However, contractor A is going to build your house for thousands less. Thousands less. And contractor B is going to build your house for thousands more. Okay? So what was going on, and what we can look back in history and prove what was going on, is that despite that somebody might have been racist and bigoted, they preferred their pocketbook over their bigotry. So they went with the black contractor to build their house because it cost them less to build it. Dr. Thomas Sowell, or I believe it's Dr. Thomas Sowell, he had mentioned that because he grew up in like the earliest 20th century. I almost made him older than he was, and I hope he doesn't get on to me about that. Yeah, we are friends on Facebook. So, anyways, Dr. Thomas Sowell had mentioned that his dad, or somebody in his life, had mentioned that for the first time they had seen some white guys building a house. And you can find these accounts all over the South. Like, it was uncommon to see white guys building something. Uncommon in the racist South. Another great statistic for you. I see somebody said I kind of like the facts. I like the facts too. I love facts over emotion in a lot of these cases, because emotions gets us nowhere. But facts will clarify and will hone down to what the issue is. So I love facts. But another little pedia. It's Pantopedia, okay? Pedia Pant, man. That sounds wrong. It sounds kind of it sounds kind of pedophilish. Pedia Pant. It's Pantopedia. And I'll give you some bonus points there, Mr. Hizataki, if we can remember who came up with that. I don't know if it was you. Somebody came up with that. It's probably Stovall. Anyways, so in the South, about 80% of trades companies, electricians, plumbers, carpenters, masonaries, masons, whatever, all your trades that go in, it was you? Okay. Extra points to Mr. Hizataki, because I couldn't remember. I thought it was you, but I didn't want to give credit where credit wasn't due. But I remember it being Pantopedia, not Pedia Pant. But anyways, great times. All of my new watchers, Mr. Hizataki, me and him worked together in Iraq as contractors, and kind of butted heads at first, but then eventually became pretty good friends, if you ask me. But he's great people. He's got a good heart, and be looking out for his invention. I don't know what it is, but he went and had an invention reviewed at some company, and maybe we'll see Mr. Hizataki's face on the screen, on a commercial somewhere, selling a product. And he's all right. Jules Lane. Mr. Lane is another guy I worked with in Iraq as a contractor. He's great people too. Me and him also didn't see eye to eye on a lot of things, but He's awesome. Mr. Jules Lane is an entrepreneur himself. Last I talked to him. But great people. I miss those guys. They mean a lot to me. I pissed them off a lot. I know that. But I love them. I love them all. So anyways, back to what I was saying. In the South, during the early 20th century, prior to 1931, that's a key date. Yes, I am bald. Thank you for noticing. I've been bald for a while. As a matter of, let's talk. Let's get on that look, real quick. So I'm bald, right? And Rachel, you know who you can thank for that? I mean, I was going bald anyways, but you can thank our dear friend, one of my other fellow contractors in Iraq, and he's sadly passed away. Mr. Dwayne Irvin and Mr. Hizataki that you see there commenting in the comments. I went to the barbershop and got me a shadow fade like I always get, right? And I get in the van, our work van, and I think it was Mr. Hizataki that looked at me and was like, what kind of haircut did you get? I said, man, I got a shadow fade, man. He's like, looks more like a reverse fade. And I was like, I was upset at the time. I was mad. I was like, whatever, but I secretly laughed hysterically at the joke. But it was funny. So that was the catalyst that made me go, I should just start shaving. Just start shaving bald. And you hear my kids yelling in the background. Apologize for that. But yeah, I started shaving my head bald because of Mr. Hizataki and Mr. Dwayne Irvin. May he rest in peace. That sucks. But yeah, I like my fades. But so anyways, back to what I was saying. I know, right? Back to what I was saying. 80% of trades companies, electricians, plumbers, roughly 80. Depending on what study you read, the numbers vary from there. I always like to I'll take the average sometimes, or I'll look at all of them and I'll look at how did they quantify this, and I'll take the numbers that look more valid as far as the way they quantified it. But roughly about 80% of all trades companies, plumbers, carpenters, masons, electricians, carpenters, you name it, were black owned and black operated in the South. So one of my projects I did for in my pursuit of my education was I actually went to some of the permit archives of my hometown of Jacksonville, Florida, and I found that up until about 1940, only a handful of contracts were pulled by a white-owned company in Jacksonville, Florida. Only about a handful up until 1940. After that, you look at the permits and it's like, whoa, there's this huge shift from black-owned companies pulling permits to build projects to white-owned companies in 1940. And we'll get into why. So, and this is true. This was true around the whole country. And except for in the North. The North was a little different. And what did we have in the North that was different in the South? Well, we had white controlled and membered unions in the North. Unions dominated the North when it came to the trades. They didn't do so much they didn't do so well in the South. So anyways, so what changed all this? What changed all this? Well, what changed all this was called the Davis-Bacon Act of 1931. Okay. And what the Davis-Bacon Act did was it required private contractors to pay prevailing wages to employees on all construction projects receiving more than $2,000 in federal funding. So, and here was the intent. Okay, here's the intent I'm gonna show you this here. The act was passed in order to prevent non-unionized black and immigrant laborers from competing with unionized white workers. So this was the actual intent and of the Davis-Bacon Act. Okay. And we can go into the history. I want to find where it talks about the Representative Davis and Bacon. That's the dude's actual last name. Talked about it. And here's one. Bacon's proposal of the bill, of the Davis-Bacon Act. You will not think that a Southern man is more than human if he smiles over the fact that your reaction to that real problem you are confronted with in any community with a superabundance or large aggregation of Negro labor. So that was prior to the Davis-Bacon Act being passed. Bacon submitted 13 bills and to regulate labor on federal public works contracts. Finally, the bill submitted by Bacon and Senator James Davis was passed in 1931. At the height of the Depression, with the support of the American Federation of Labor. Okay. The AFL, American Federation of Labor, was one of the biggest supporters of the Davis-Bacon Act. What is the AFL? Well, it's the AFL-CIO today. See, the AFL and CIO, and I forget what CIO stands for, they merged into one union at some point in history, after 1931, obviously. So, the debate over Bacon's bill betrayed the racial animus that motivated passage of the law. Representative John Conker stated, I have received numerous complaints in recent months about Southern contractors employing low-paid colored mechanics, getting work and bringing the employees from the South. And this is the enlightened Northerners. And by the way, all these people that are in support of the Davis-Bacon Act are Democrats. They were Democrats. But apparently there was this big shift, apparently, that happened. Or whatnot. Anyways, I digress. Let's see, Representative Clayton summarily explained that contractor has cheap colored labor. That he transports and he puts them in cabins, and it is labor of that sort that is in competition with white labor throughout the country. Okay? Other derogatory comments were made about the use of cheap labor, cheap imported labor, transient labor, and unattached migratory workmen. While supporters of that act intended to disadvantage immigrant workers of all races, they were particularly concerned with inhibiting black employment. There we go. The American Federation of Labor and Congress of Industrial Organizations is a National Trade Union Center. And the largest federation of unions in the United States. There we go. Yep. Mr. Jenkins got to it first there, buddy. Congress of Industrial Organizations. Yes. So the AFL and the CIO at some point merged and are now one. And whatnot. Supporters of the Davis-Bacon Act were also fully anti-capitalist rhetoric. Representative McCormick said of Davis-Bacon Act, it will force the contractor who heretofore has used cheap imported labor to submit bids based upon the prevailing wage scale to those employed. It compels the unfair competitor to enter into the field of fair competition. Fairness. Oh. So you get where I'm going at here. The Davis-Bacon Act in 1931 was passed, and its sole intent, was to lessen and get rid of black labor that was unfairly taking jobs away from white Americans. That's the whole point. I'm wearing my my Camp Spiker shirt. See that? With yep. So I found it and thought it might be appropriate for today. Yeah, Beth, I got it. I had to. I muted. Exactly what judges fairness? You tell me. You tell me, Mr. Lane. I really don't know. Or who judges fairness? Yes. Who judges fairness? So, what we had in the South was, and this is what was going on at the time, through this couple decades. I muted my mic so I could readjust my chair so you guys didn't hear all the clickety-clacking and whatnot of the chair. So, what was happening was, black-owned and black-operated trade companies from the South were bidding on federal contracts. And because they paid their workers less, they could actually win the contracts because they could bid lower on the contracts. So, and the white labor unions in the North didn't like that. And since they couldn't compete fairly with them, as they say, fact of the matter is they just couldn't compete with them because they were paying their workers more, substantially more in many cases, than they were, and than the black-owned companies were. But because of such, the black-owned companies were winning the contracts to build these federal projects. And so the only recourse that the white labor unions had was basically to petition senators and congressmen to pass a law called the Davis-Bacon Act. And they got it passed finally. And what the Davis-Bacon Act basically requires is that if you're going to bid on a federal contract, you must pay your laborers the prevailing wage. Okay? Now, the Department of Labor has attempted to alter its regulations to allow contractors to hire a limited number of unskilled helpers to work on Davis-Bacon projects for less than a prevailing wage. Now, what we mean by unskilled helpers, I worked on a project rewiring. There was a big remodel of a high school in Maryland that I did a couple years ago. And I remember when I first got to the job, I didn't understand this whole prevailing wage thing and whatnot. But I was getting paid $12 an hour. No, $15 an hour. That was what was agreed upon. I get paid. But when I worked on this high school, I get my first paycheck after the end of the first week, and I was like, there's a mistake here. Because my paycheck was like $7,000. And I was like, yeah, and I only worked 42 hours, and I know that math doesn't, that math doesn't. So anyways, apparently at the time, I was getting paid like $26 an hour or $32, somewhere in there. Now, there was a kid who was the brother-in-law of my journeyman, or the journeyman, I should say, that was in charge of the project. And his brother-in-law, whom was only like 17 at the time, maybe 18, he just graduated high school or just about to graduate high school. All he did was walk around with a broom and sweep. He didn't know anything about electrical. He just basically came behind us and swept up, you know, or assisted us sometimes maybe to go get a tool or to, you know, go get something for us, take, you know, whatever, hold this, do that, you know, whatever. And the law required him to be paid. The Davis-Bacon Act required him to be paid the same as me. And to be honest with you, 9 times out of 10, he was just standing around. Because we were non-union electricians. So in a non-union electrical field, when you're a non-unionized electrician, you have a different work dynamic, work ethic, maybe. I'm going to say work dynamic. I don't want to attack union guys' character per se, but it's a different work dynamic. And that as a non-unionized electrician, you're on the job and you literally you'll clean up after yourself, or you do things like make sure you just don't leave a mess behind yourself as you're working. So there's nobody to basically do the job of cleaning up. But when you're in a union type setting, there's a guy to do the wire nut. There's a guy to twist the wire. There's a guy to turn the screwdriver. I'm exaggerating, but you get what I'm saying. Is that you can't, like, 9 times out of 10, a person is only going to do one job, and that job doesn't include cleaning up. You'll hear a lot. Sometimes you'll hear a unionized electrician go, "I'm not a janitor." So you'll see that type of a unionized electrician just kind of throw scrap wire on the floor, just toss it everywhere, whatever, drop trash on the floor because there's a guy hired to sweep up. Now that sounds all fine. That creates jabs. That's jibs, right? But it also creates an unnecessary expense. When I could just basically kick a cardboard box that I've cut the top off of and kick that box around with me and just toss my trash in it as I go. Toss my scrap wire, my insulation that I strip off the wire. Just toss all that in the box as I go. And then at the end of the day, there's nothing to clean up. So, and that saves the customer money. And so, anyways, the Davis-Bacon Act, in a whole short run, and we can discuss this more. The issue is similar to when the government interfered with American Samoa, coming in there, implemented minimum wage. Absolutely, and that happened when, Beth? That happened just recently, I believe. Recently in relative terms, like the last few years or whatnot. And I think I even commented on that when it was an issue, how that was going to destroy their economy, and it pretty much has, over in American Samoa. I don't know if you're still listening, Mr. Hizataki, but Beth Bowen is my cousin. She's my mother's sister's daughter, and she's married to a Samoan man. I think I've told you that before. His name is Mark, and I'm not gonna attempt to pronounce the last name, and that's not even really his last name, as we know with you. I'm gonna kick myself because Mr. Hizataki, I was sitting there the other day, and I know what your first name actually is, but I can't remember it for the life of me. I knew it for so long, and now I can't remember it for the life of me. But anyways, back on point. The Davis-Bacon Act's sole purpose was to marginalize and get rid of black competition. And so, and it accomplished exactly that. And how did it accomplish exactly that? Remember I said roughly 80% of all trades in the South were black-owned and black-operated? Well, by the end of the 1930s, that dropped to about 17%. And why is that? Okay. Now, I'm going to ask this of everybody out there. When was the first minimum wage law passed? And it has to do with the Fair Labor Standards Act. That's when the first actual minimum wage was passed. But the Davis-Bacon Act was the precursor to it. We wouldn't have had a minimum wage had it not been for the Davis-Bacon Act. Davis-Bacon Act was kind of the outline, the backbone of the Fair Labor Standards Act. So somebody Google that. Let's do a little Google it. Google. 1938. Ding 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 ding. 1938. Was it 1938? It was 1938. So, the Fair Labor Standards Act passed in 1938. What happened a year later? What happened? Something significant happened a year later. What was that? What was that? Anybody? Anybody in the comments? 1939, something very, very, very significant happened. What could it be? Could it be the Great Depression? Yes, it was. Well, I should say the stock market crash happened in 1939, October to be exact. Was it November? Anyways, stock market crashes in 1939. Is there a connection? I think there might be. So, anyways, of course I know, Rachel. Now, I don't know everything. I know economics, though. And to go back to Walter E. Williams and the story of my signed copy from Dr. Williams, whom I don't even think there's a picture of him in this book for some reason. I'm going to pull one up right now. Dr. Walter E. Williams. But, I have a bag of popcorn I set on the side here. I was snacking on earlier. I keep hitting my mic. Let's see here. Dr. Walter E. Williams. Now, there are two Dr. Walter Williams out there. And they're actually a dichotomy of each other. It's strange. But here we go. Here's a picture of Dr. Walter E. Williams. Black Tuesday, October 29th, 1929. Oh, wait a minute. That was a decade prior, wasn't it? I had my dates mixed up. See, I don't know everything. But there we are, Dr. Walter E. Williams, head of the economics department at George Mason University. Amazing man, and I'm friends with him on Facebook, but we've never actually like conversed directly with each other and whatnot. But apparently, he's a great guy in person. He's 80 something years old now. Let's see here. Let's go to the all here. Go to his Wikipedia. 81 years old, man. But apparently, this dude is like still on point as far as his mental capacity is. My friend who did have the meeting with him said he was like, it was like he was 30 years old. The way he talked, the way he conducted himself, the way he, what have you, and so on and so forth. So, and I remember now the reason why you make the connection between the minimum wage and the Great Depression. And it didn't have to do with the stock market crash. It had to do with the prolonging of the Great Depression. But that's a whole nother topic and subject. And we're not going to get into that today. Because today is about minimum wage and how it affects minorities, particularly black minorities. Okay. So, prior to 1938, there was no minimum wage. And Dr. Walter Williams talks about how during the time that he grew up, which was in the 40s, 50s, so the minimum wage had already passed, but he talks about how inflation had basically made the minimum wage null and void. Like, inflation had went up so much that the minimum wage was basically zero at that time. So the minimum wage didn't have an effect on the economy during his teenage years, okay? During his adolescent years, he talks about. So the what he talks about, and Dr. Thomas Sowell, Dr. Stephen Horowitz, and many other economists talk about how the minimum wage affects blacks mostly because of maybe people's bigotry, but more or less has to do with unskilled labor. Okay, so Dr. Walter E. Williams talks about one of his first jobs was he got hired by a local grocer in Philadelphia, which is where he grew up at, and all he did was sweep the floors, right? And he got paid very little at the time, like it was pennies compared to today. But he said, I was able to get in the door. I was able to learn new skills, learn more skills, and pick up on other things that other people were doing around him. And he said, had there been a minimum wage set at a certain amount to where it would not have been prudent for the employer to employ him to just sweep floors as somebody who didn't know nothing, then he wouldn't have got that first job, he wouldn't have learned his first skills, and he would not have moved up. And basically, that's the effect that the minimum wage has on the economy. That it prices out the unskilled, least skilled workers in the labor force. Prices them out of a job. And so, or it brings about automation, which we're seeing a lot more these days. It brought about automation back then just as well. Think about elevators. Elevators in buildings. What did we used to have in elevators? Now, this is before even my time. Way before most of our times. But pop quiz. How did the elevator go up and down in buildings at one time? Anybody have any clue? Didn't know nothing. I don't know. See, bet you're going to have to call in. I don't even know why my little text things aren't working. It tells you how to get a hold of me. Let me try and figure that out while you guys answer the question, how did elevators go up and down at one time? There we go, Mr. Payne. An elevator attendant standing in the elevator. And yeah, I believe so. Ropes pulled by people at one time. Yes, but more relevant to the question in the context of minimum wage is an elevator attendant standing in the elevator would pull levers that worked motors. And that job went away specifically because of the first minimum wage laws. Specifically because of the first minimum wage laws. That job went away. It became prohibitively expensive to hire somebody to do that job, which doesn't require many skills at all except knowing how much to pull the lever to get to a particular floor. That job went away. So that's one of the effects of the minimum wage. It puts certain people out of the labor market because they don't hold the necessary skills to justify the amount of payment. And so you think about other professions that, or other, I shouldn't say professions, I should just say jobs, that you look at somebody and you say, okay, they offer this much value to the company. They produce a certain amount of money per hour of value when I hire them. Now, shocker, people, no matter where you work, unless they're running a bad business, no matter where you work, they make more money off of you per hour than they pay you. Or else, there's no point in being in the business. No matter where you work, they make more money off of you per hour than they pay you, which is fine. Which is perfectly fine, or else they don't make profit, they don't expand, they don't grow, they don't nothing. Okay? So, and I find it funny that the first people to call greed on some things like this are the first people to not turn down a raise. Well, what are you greedy? You're not going to turn down the raise? Well, what are you greedy? Anyways, so minimum wage prices certain people out of a job, and unfortunately, that has the effect of hurting blacks in this country more. And that's a problem that we could talk about. Like, that's a problem. Why is it that disproportionately blacks, especially black teenagers, are disproportionately unskilled people? Like, they don't have skills necessary or required for the job market. And that's a question I would love to get into and love to solve, but raising the minimum wage is not the way to go about it. If you want to see more black unemployment in this country, go ahead and fight for $15 an hour. Go ahead. You want to see more black teenagers not get jobs and only have to look to basically crime on the streets and some other nefarious activity instead of them getting a job? Go ahead. Fight for $15 an hour. You know, you get this. People who don't support the minimum wage are always accused of being somebody who doesn't like black people, and I'm like, you're a moron, because you don't know what the minimum wage does to black folk. I do. It hurts them more than it helps them. It puts them out of jobs. It puts them in the unemployment line. It puts black teenagers in the only recourse they have is to turn to crime and turn to other nefarious activities. So no, if you want to raise the minimum wage, you are the one who doesn't like black people. You are the one who wants to hurt them more. I got a little passionate there because I'm passionate about this. Okay? So, and yes, so I digress. I digress on that. But within just a few years, let me give you some more facts. Minimum wage law was passed in 1938. In 1937, black teenage unemployment was lower than white teenager unemployment. Within 2 years of the 1938, by 1940, that dynamic had flipped. By 1940, it was black teenagers who had higher unemployment rates than white teenagers. For the first time since slavery, white teenagers had a lower unemployment rate than black teenagers in 1940. So yes, minimum wage is a bad idea. It doesn't help the economy. It doesn't help low-skilled workers get a job. College is not for everybody. Not everybody should go to college. When I was 18 years old, I should not have gone to college. I did not go to college. Even if I wanted to go to college, even if I could have gone to college, because I couldn't. I should not have gone to college when I was 18. Was not ready for anything like that at the time. I was more of a hands-on person, more of a trades person. I learned the electrical trade from my father from the time I was 8 years old. Every summer from the time I was 8 years old, I went every summer from the time I was 8. To say that every summer from the time I was 8, I went to work with my father at his electrical trade, and so. Except for a few summers there, I'd had some other jobs, like when I got to an older teenager. But right out of high school, I went into doing electrical work. Straight out. I mean, I graduated on June 9th, if I remember correctly. June 11th, I was on the job. You know, And yes, I did go work for the company my dad worked at, but he's actually my stepdad, and really nobody had any idea who I was. I have a different last name to him, so maybe I got the job because of him, but I eventually proved my worth, because I knew the trade, I knew the skills. Before I even showed up on the job, I already even had all the tools, most of the necessary basic tools, anyways. But not everybody has that, ability. And it's funny because when you go back and you look through history and you look at the Department of Labor statistics and whatnot, you'll find that there was a time that most electricians were black, most plumbers were black in the South. Most carpenters were black. Most plumbers were black. Most mason workers were black. And now it's completely flipped. Now, and again, the minimum... I'm going to give you a quote from Dr. Walter E. Williams. And well, actually, I'm not going to say it's from Dr. Walter E. Williams because I could have the quote wrong. But I'm pretty sure it was Dr. Walter E. Williams. And that is, the most anti-Negro law ever put on the books was the minimum wage law. Now that is in contrast with the Jim Crow laws, discrimination, laws, so on and so forth, that the minimum wage was the most anti-Negro law ever put on the books. Now, I can give you some further examples, and I'm going to give you examples of South Africa during apartheid. If you go back and you look at the economic history of Africa, South Africa, during apartheid, white unions did the same thing there. White unions got together and pushed for a minimum wage law with the sole intent, and because of the dynamic and the context of that society's existence, the white unions were allowed to be openly blunt about their bigotry without having any fears or repercussions about it. And the white unions specifically initiated a minimum wage law in South Africa with the specific intent and purpose to push out black laborers, black labor companies, so on and so forth. That was its sole intent. No ifs, ands, or qualms about it. But fortunately, whites they were the ruling class, but they were not the majority class. And so most blacks in South Africa just ignored it. Even a lot of the whites ignored the law and continued to pay, whatever it is they were paying. And if you go back and look at the history of economics and the history of the economic stability of South Africa, it didn't get better when apartheid left. It actually got worse for South Africans, for black South Africans. And the economy tanked when Mandela took over. But that's really kind of a whole nother issue, but related. Mandela was a socialist, and he pushed for communist socialist policies, and it tanked the economy over there. So things are kind of turning around now, but they're not quite there. But if you go back and you look at the poverty rates, the income rates, the everything on the economic side of things, you'll see that South black Africans are actually higher on that, doing better on that front during apartheid than they did afterwards. And it had more to do with things like minimum wage, things like pushing socialist, communist policies with Mandela than anything. My opinion of Mandela is not the same as most people, but we can get it. That could be another episode of Pants Undone. Sorry, I'm a little parched. Been talking a lot. So that's my rundown on minimum wage. I don't like it. It doesn't do minorities any good, unfortunately. It doesn't do anybody good, really. And really the focus is, and you'll see studies. You'll see studies where unemployment goes down sometimes when the minimum wage is raised. I don't care about that. And what I do is I dig deeper into numbers. And for instance, in I want to say Seattle, there was a time that they touted unemployment went down despite the minimum wage going up. And so I dug deeper into numbers. And what I noticed was a lot of people were fired. And a lot of those people were your unskilled laborers, your unskilled workers. And unfortunately, those were disproportionately black and Latino and so on and so forth. Okay? And then what happened was they ended up hiring a lot more whites. So unemployment went down, but unemployment for blacks and Latinos in the Seattle area went way up, and white unemployment went down. That's what happened in Seattle. So you got to dig deeper in the numbers. It's not as simple as, did the unemployment rate go up? No. Okay, good. Dig deeper in the numbers. Flesh and blood people matter. Individuals matter in that particular scenario. They matter. So you go and you find out when somebody touts a number to you, including me, for God's sake, check me out. Let's dig into numbers together, man. Let's get to the truth. That's what I care about, the truth. And you dig into numbers. And what we saw in Seattle was that, yes, unemployment went down, but then when you break it down by demographics, you saw, wait a minute, a lot of blacks got fired. Less blacks are getting hired. A lot of Latinos got fired or let go. Less Latinos are getting hired when the minimum wage went up. And then fewer whites were let go, but more whites are getting hired. And minimum wage. It doesn't matter what all these economists I brought up say, Dr. Walter Williams, Dr. Thomas Sowell, Dr. Stephen Horowitz, you name the economist on that side of the spectrum. The one thing they'll tell you, it does not matter the intent of the policy. It matters the real world effects. It doesn't matter what the intention of the policy is. It can be a well-intentioned policy. And basically all those economists, including me, look at it and go, I do not care about the intentions. How does it actually affect people? 9 times out of 10, the intentions of a policy is not its effect. And here's another thing. Just because you put the name of it in the policy, the Affordable Care Act, right? Putting the name affordable in the name of the policy does not make it affordable. You understand? Net neutrality, which we talked about yesterday. Simply putting the name neutrality in the name of the policy does not make it so. Simple as that. You can put all kinds of feel-good names in the name of a policy. It don't make it so. Okay? Trump can sit there and tout my American jobs policy, and that don't make it so. And we could go on and on and on about this. But I digress. I'm gonna say that a lot. I digress. What if I were to tell you I don't even know what it means? That'd be funny, wouldn't it? But I make sure I know what the words mean before I say them. Because you can look like an idiot, man. At least I try to make sure. Sometimes Obama's legacy with his health care, which was a huge fail. Amen. A frickin' man. But minimum wage negatively, disproportionately affects minorities in a negative way. Very, 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 very much so. And therefore, I'm not for minimum wage hikes. But I'm not for them because they're just a bad idea. And on top of that, they hurt blacks more than they hurt anybody. So, let's see. Anybody have a question? A question they want to ask me? Serious questions, mind you. Call me on Skype at Pants Undone. Or call me on Google Hangouts at Pants Undone. Pants.undone at gmail.com. Not sure why. Oh, I see the problem now. There we go. There we go. We figured it out. It's a simple setting. It's the simple things, man, that get you all the time. It's the simple things. Let's see. Let's real quick. Now, one of my listeners, watchers yesterday wanted me to go more in depth with net neutrality. She said she wanted some more insight on why Netflix should pay or whatever. But that's kind of a broad question. So I told her, I said, hey, either call or email me your questions and whatnot. And she didn't email me. She didn't email me her questions. Inbox on Pants Undone is empty there, folks. It's empty. But what's trending? What's trending besides Pants Undone on Facebook? I'm not trending at all. What's trending? Oh. That's my daughter.
I'm listening because I don't have Facebook.
You don't have Facebook?
No, I don't have enough room to download it.
Oh, well, that's good.
Listening to your podcast in your life.
Okay, well,
I'll shut up now.
I don't know. Can you guys hear my daughter? Let me know if you can. Let's see. Uber. New Uber blow as European legal advisor says service should be licensed like taxis. Great. That's good for the economy. Not. Speaking of the Comey thing, right? And we weren't speaking of that. Anybody know in France, they just had an election for their new president. And Obama was up in arms about the possible Russian interference with the American election, right? Yeah, it's undemocratic and should not have happened. Is what he said, right? I swear, like a day later, he jumps on a plane and goes to France and gets involved with the France election. And I can't remember the lady's name. Her name was like Le Pen. The The lady was a conservative, right? That was running the woman. The woman was a conservative in France. Emmanuel Macron. Emmanuel Macron. He was the liberal over there. And so Obama goes and he gets involved with their election. And even though Le Pen, the woman, was ahead in the polls, Macron won the election because, most likely, of Obama's interference. Now, what is that about? Like, are they going to have, like, calls for investigations? Was America involved with the France election? Probably not. I just found it funny. How Obama, berates Russia's interference with, with America, but then runs over to France to interfere with their election. Like, literally a week or so later. I just found it funny. Ironic. Uh-oh. Boy Scouts of America. That's important to me. Mormon Church cuts ties with Boy Scouts for older teens. Huh. I'm kind of okay with that. I'm basically okay with that. I'm going to read this. I'm sorry. Uh-oh. See, here we go. An ad. The Mormon Church, the largest sponsor of the Boy Scout troops in the United States, announced Thursday.
It's Steel Dealer Days.
See, I hate ads. That was very, very loud in my ears. Ridiculously loud. The Mormon Church, the largest sponsor of Boy Scout troops in the United States, announced Thursday it is pulling older teenagers from the organization as the religion takes a step toward developing its own global scouting-like program. The Utah-based religion's announcement means an estimated 130,000 to 180,000 teenagers ages 14 and 18 will no longer participate in Boy Scouts starting next year. A very significant loss for the Boy Scouts of America. Younger Mormon boys remain in the Boy Scouts. The Faith said the decision wasn't triggered by Boy Scouts policy change in 2015 to allow gay troop leaders, since Mormon troops were allowed to run their groups to adhere to church teachings. The loss is only a fraction of the 2.3 million youth in Boy Scouts, but the organization has been grappling with declining membership for years and has enjoyed a close bond with the Utah-based Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints for more than a century. They have. I'm not fond of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I'm not fond of that church at all. No offense to any of my Mormon friends, really. It's just a difference in doctrine, difference in stuff. Big differences. But the Mormon Church has pulled their sponsorship of the Boy Scouts of America. They said it doesn't have anything to do with allowing gay leaders, but I just really kind of doubt that. Let's see here. Donald Trump launches cybersecurity effort. President Trump on Thursday signed an executive order to bolster the federal government's cybersecurity and protect the country's cyber infrastructure, White House officials said. Trump. Maybe I'll release tax returns after leaving the White House. Whatever, dude. You're an idiot. Let's see here. There's one that... Oh, yeah. Uber. This is all... this Uber thing really ties into this whole minimum wage discussion. It also ties into blacks in this country. Dr. Walter Williams, in one of his documentaries, pointed out... I'm getting the numbers a little wrong, but they're darn close to what he pointed out. Dr. Walter E. Williams pointed out in Philadelphia that something like 70% of taxis during the early 1970s were black-owned and black-operated. 70% of taxis in Philadelphia were black-owned and black-operated. Because at the time, in order to run a taxi service, was basically like Uber today. Actually, it was a lot easier back then. All you needed was a car and a driver's license. And a full gas tank. That's it. And you went to the airport, you had a little sign on top of your car that said taxi. Guy would walk up, say, yeah, I need a ride. All right, man, where you want to go? And they would go. Well, blacks owned and operated 70% of the taxi cabs in Philadelphia. Now, sometime later, there was a big push for licensing and certifications and insurance and and all this, and it was pushed for our safety, for concern of the folk, is how they said. So, within just a couple of years of licensing and certification and all that crap being required, because all you needed to be a taxi driver was a driver's license, a car, a sign maybe on your car, and a tank of gas. That's it. And you could run a taxi. Now you need certifications and licenses and all this other. You need to pay fees and blah, blah, blah. Now it costs something like $30,000 just to start running a taxi in Philadelphia. Well, it went from 70% black owned and operated, with just in a few short years after certifications and licensing and all that jazz was passed, to like 20%. And it's a lot lower today. So here we are with Uber, right? And now they're cracking down on Uber, basically trying to make Uber have to go through the same hoops as any other taxi driver. And you know who the biggest pushers of those laws are to force Uber to be just as certified as a taxi driver is? Taxi companies. Because they don't like the competition. They don't like the fact that you can get an Uber ride for far cheaper than you can call one of them. You know what they could do, the taxi companies? They could just lower their prices. But they don't want to do that because they're all union. All the workers are union and they won't take pay cuts. So something's got to give, folk. There comes a time when you outlive a service. There's a time where it comes you outlive a service. I guess there should have been a bunch of laws passed to prevent cars from taking jobs from stagecoach drivers. I guess there should have been a bunch of laws passed to save all the wagon wheel makers. I guess there should have been a law passed to save all the shoe horse, or the horseshoe guys, the blacksmiths, whatever. We should have saved their jobs. I must start a petition. I must partake. Smoke free, folks. Year and a half. All because of vape. And now the government is coming after that. Here in Delaware, I don't know, Chuck, if you're still watching, they proposed yesterday or the day before, some kind of increased tax on tobacco products, which would include vape products. Give us the exact stats or numbers on that, if you know. From what I remember, it's like an increase of like $1 on a pack of cigarettes. It's a 38% increase, which amounts to $1 on a pack of cigarettes. I'm thinking a 38% increase on my vape products would make vaping more expensive for me, and would be cheaper just to go back to cigarettes. or cigars. So give us a link or something, man, Chuck, if you will, if you're still watching, still listening. But yeah, good old government looking out for our well-being. Taxation is theft, folks. Taxation is theft, folks. Try not paying your taxes. You know how it's theft? If I were to walk up to you in the street, put a gun to your head, and say, "Give me $10 so I can go feed the homeless guy down the road," I'd still get arrested, right? I get arrested for theft and robbery, armed robbery, so on and so forth. But yet, that's exactly what the government does to us every day. They do not literally put a gun to our head, but try not paying your taxes. They'll put a gun to your head and say either pay your taxes or go to jail. So, I think that's it for me today, folks. I gotta go check on my daughter. She's sick. She's got the strep throat, the strep throatus. She's got the her tonsils are swollen apparently, but we went to the doctor yesterday, got her some meds, and she's gonna be good. Be praying for my son. He's going through some rough stuff these days. He's dealing with some things. So, nothing like too serious, but, he needs some prayer. He needs some guidance. He needs wisdom. He needs direction. As far as, I can't be there with him throughout his school days. Can't be there to watch him, tell him, "Okay, son, do this. Okay, son, do that." He's 14 years old. He needs to learn how to do things himself. But, we're going to go ahead and end this here. I love you guys. I appreciate you watching. I think we had a record viewership today. I think we're running right around 10 viewers at once at some point, which is good. I like it. So maybe around this time is a good time. I don't know. You guys message me on pants.undone@gmail.com or message me on Facebook. And let me know what you guys want to talk about. Send me some questions. Seriously. And what have you. Alright? Let me know what subjects you'd like to see me talk about. See me address. Things like that. Well, I love you guys. And here's a little outro for you. See, why is it not playing? Something screwy is going on with my oh. There we go. I moved files around, that's what happened. So I moved files around in order to get things a little more squared away. Yes, I'm dancing in my chair. Don't judge me. guys for watching. You can watch the whole video when it comes available. Also gonna start putting these on my YouTube channel.
In paradise up above, if you would tell me I'm the only one that you love, life could be a dream, sweetheart.